Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me and see me. I might just adjust this a little. So my internet blipped right as I was getting ready. Um, so I didn't get a chance to like check the camera and do some other things. And if I disappear, that will be why. So I see Quindy and Jedi Jared and Julia Trent. I hope you're all having a good day. Hopefully everything looks synced and whatnot. Quindy says her internet has been awful all day. Our theory is that a house down the street sold pretty recently, and my husband saw the AT&T truck, so we think they're getting their internet hooked up, and somehow they messed up our internet. Hi, green users. So all right, let's see what I'm going to do today. Thank you, Julie. So this is Christmas Dragon that's going to glare out a bit because of all the lights. But when I saw this shirt, I just had to get it because I love dragons, and I like to have a nerdy shirt for Christmas. I switch over to my double view. Here we go. So let's see. Last week, if you weren't able to make it, I worked on painting this cute little guy. He's one of the Reaper Christmas Vault miniatures. So these were previously available as a gift with purchase, but they're now up for individual sale. So if you just want this guy or one of the other ones that are available this year, you can do that. And Julie sculpted this. I thought about continuing with him today, but I don't know if I want to use exactly the same recipes I did for the greens. So I didn't want to make you sit through me being indecisive and stuff. Excuse me. And also, you know, while we like Christmas, some of us, not all of us do. Maybe you're kind of, you know, getting ready for your family to show up. And these are the paints that are available too. So I'll just put these here while I'm trying. Maybe you just have had some unhappy shopping experiences, but for the people who aren't loving Christmas right this minute, what I'm going to do today is paint Krampus. So if you're cranky like Krampus, this is your day. So this was available last year as like paint your Krampus kit is I think what Ron called it. So it came with 4 paints, and we assumed that you had your own black and white. And it really is a little mini learn to paint kit. I actually hadn't looked at it since last year until I wanted to at least get that coat on him. So I was looking, I'm like, well, what color did I do for that? But there, if you want to get a friend into painting and you're willing to help them just a little, you know, give them the black and white. I do explain, like it goes through the same stuff, well, some of the same stuff as the learn to paint kit with how to do dry brushing and washing. So it's abbreviated, but there's a lot of information there. And they found some of these in the warehouse when they were cleaning up. So I'm going to go through the kit. I'll probably do some parts a little bit differently. So in the kit, I pretty much have everything except there's some metal bands on his barrel where he would put the naughty children. And since I could only do 4 colors, and I didn't want to waste a metallic on just that tiny little amount of space, I put in a very simple, here's how you're going to paint that in MM. But if someone has metallics and they want to paint that with their choice of metallics, that works too. But I may do some layering instead of doing everything dry brushing. His fur is very good for dry brushing, and the birch bundle is very good for dry brushing. But a couple, you know, I'd probably rather do his face with layering and stuff. All right, so I'm going to just check this coat because I think I see some white spots, which is not unusual. I almost always like to do 2 coats of paint, even if it's a fairly opaque color. And if you're painting on a textured surface, oops, apologies for making things shake, you're bound to see some little white spots and stuff that you just can't see when the paint is wet. So I'm just trying to get all my stuff where it needs to be. Move that a little bit to the side. I think I can get everything in because, as we know, the camera hates. I'm trying to focus on the palette and the guy. All right, so let's take a look at him. I can definitely see a white spot right there on the leg, and I think there's one on his beard. So this the first step was to paint the hooves pure black. I am using pure black and pure white today, but it should work with any of the Reaper, you know, true blacks and whites. Like, it might not work if you use, like, some of the ones that are super dark blue, really, because that's going to shift some of the colors you mix. But it should work with like solid black and dragon black and all of that. Let's see. So Green User says they're giving their grandnephew this for Christmas. Oh, that's pretty cool. I hope they have fun with it. And Quinny says, my Krampus from last year lives on my microwave. I don't know why. I just put him there and he stayed. Well, he's supervising your food cooking. Right, so I'm going back to my step. So the first step was hooves painted with black and then paint the fur, including the tip of the tail. And I wrote in the thing, don't forget the tip of the tail, because look what I did. I forgot the tip of the tail. And it's, so in the book, I say 3 drops of black and 3 drops of shield brown. And I didn't do that when I was painting him just now, and I wish that I had, because the reason I said that is it takes about that much paint to cover all of him. So it's an equal amount, but you're going to need, an equal ratio of 1:1, but you're going to need more than 1 drop, unless somehow you're more magical than I am, which is entirely possible. I think I do use more paint than the average bear, but I'm okay with that. So that mixes up this kind of, you know what, maybe I don't have my brightness up enough. So that it doesn't look like it on my video camera. It might on your screen, but that is not a pure black. It's a very dingy brown. I'll put a pure black there for comparison. But I would probably have to swatch that for you to see that it really isn't pure black. All right, so let's get those parts I missed, starting with his tail particularly. Because that will take a minute to dry. I do have a few things to talk about or show while I'm waiting for things to dry. Although that, right before the internet went out, I was trying to figure out my slideshow thing that I have sometimes, and so I have no idea if the new photos are going to show up or not, because I finished that fixing that ashtray for my friend that I had been showing if you watched the last week or two, but I gave it back to them, so I don't have it to show, but I took a few pictures. It's not perfect. I mean, if they took that to like an antique guy or whatever, they would be like, this is not mint condition, but it is close enough that you can't really tell if you're just, putting it out on as a decoration in your house. And partly where I messed up actually is the sculpting. I should have gone through and probably done a second pass or used that modeling paste or something to make sure that everything connected. I would say that the other place that it's going to be easy to miss some stuff is under his armpit there. And I did that. Even though I thought I was slopping a lot of paint in there when I was trying to paint him. So that is going to take a moment to dry before we can do the wash, and I might have to add a little bit more to the tail. So I'm going to check out my slideshow and probably discover that it is not functioning correctly. And if that is so, I will talk about something else. Let's see. Images. Well, I guess it's very much not functioning correctly if it doesn't show up at all. Well, that's weird. I think it just made the new pictures black, or maybe it hasn't downloaded them yet. I don't know, because they should be in front of this guy, who I forgot to check with Ron if that is weird, if there's still any Christmas samplers left. So hopefully there are. Oh, Dropbox is telling me I changed 7 files, so maybe it did finally download them, or not. All right, maybe I'll try this again later. But this is the Gingerbread Man, who I did not bring over here for some reason today for you to see him live. But he's in the Christmas sampler along with a couple of paints. So I'll come back here instead and show you. So when Ron asked me to do this kit, regular learn to paint kits, I like to kind of test stuff out before I just assume that it's going to work. So I like to test my color schemes. And he wasn't able to send me the Krampus right away. So I practiced on these guys. So if you just want to try out some of these color mixes that I'm talking about, you don't want to buy the kit because you already have those paints. I find that these Yetis are probably a good subject for that because they have some wood. You can paint the base of snow. They've got some other parts that you can kind of analog to the stuff I'm going to do today. So this was my first one, and I liked it, but I didn't feel like it looked spooky Krampus enough. So I made another one with darker fur, which is the kind of fur that I'm going to do today. But I think I like the skin of this guy better. So I kept the skin of this guy and changed a few other parts. Then the real ones arrived, and I did paint a test one of those. So I've given Reaper their copy. But I still have my test copy of this guy. So this is kind of what we're going to end up with, but maybe a little different. And partly I want to paint him. If you've been like a regular watcher for a while now, I did a couple shows where I took a miniature that I painted kind of as a tabletop figure or a speed paint figure, and I worked on touching it up to, what would I do to make it a more interesting or better quality figure. And I figure I can, when I finish painting this guy today, then we can have another show in January or something where I'm like, okay, what would you do to really make Krampus even cooler? I see just a little spot here. And I'm checking that tail. I think it's probably okay. I didn't quite get his little white spots in the beard. Fur and some other type of really textured surfaces are tough for that. Like sometimes you really have to poke the paint in, and you want to not use a fantastic brush for that. So I believe my next step is just a black wash, but let's check. Yes. And I don't want to do that on my wet palette because of potential mess. So I have one of these. My normal little small ones that fit under the camera better, I have been lazy and not cleaned those. Can anyone else see me? I'm showing a green connection to Twitch, but Quindy is saying, okay, Julia still sees me. Okay. Because, yeah, I would not be surprised if... Oops. Well, okay, my black is gooped up, so maybe I won't do that right there because that's going to make a lot of wash. Because in my instructions, I said 1 drop black, 2-3 drops water. Now, this is one of those things where if you use a different black, you might actually have to make a different ratio. Because I think when I was doing the paint kit for the Kickstarter, I used Dragon Black because I hadn't used that one much. I wanted to experiment with it. And I try not to duplicate colors when I do these things, but, eventually there's going to have to be some duplication because that's just how that works. There are some colors that are too useful to say I can only use them once. But I found that black was very, it was a weak color. It did not, pretty much I would do a wash with 1-to-1, which, I mean, a weak black isn't a bad thing. It can be nice for mixing because it's not going to take everything over the way a strong black will. So I actually found that, because I'd always been a really big fan of solid black, but I found that I really liked the Dragon Black when I was working on that. Let's see, when I was working on the Kickstarter Limited Paint Kit. Now for washes, I try, and for glazes too, it's a similar thing where you're working with a lot of wet paint. It's just how much you're trying to control the wet paint. I like to try to divide things up into sections. So his head is separated from his body by the straps that are holding the barrel on, and then by the way the beard is underneath, which I do see a part that I haven't painted, but hopefully this wash will take care of it. And if not, because that is such a shadowed area, I can just paint pure black on it later. And it will be fine. So I'm not going to hold you guys up from watching me do this wash just for that. And I am just slopping it on. So the head, you know, as a separate section, now it can start drying and I'm not going to touch it and everything's going to be fine. So that's why I try to do the separate section thing. Because if you can get a section done with all wet paint at the same time, you're less likely to get streaks and uneven patches and whatnot. And if you see parts you missed immediately, like I'm probably going to have to really poke in under this arm, but it's bordered by that strap again. So I have a little bit of time while the paint in that section is wet. Actually, we'll call this part of that section his back where it meets the barrel. Quindy thinks she's back. Well, I'm crossing my fingers on our internet. We thought it was us at first because recently my husband was like, I can buy this gadget and make the wireless better. And then I was starting up this computer and I'm like, well, we don't use this. So the computer I do for this is actually plugged into the wall for the internet to make a more secure connection because Justin said he preferred that to wireless. So even though this new wireless is faster, and maybe we'll test it one show, but this didn't seem the show to do it since I was just about to start, and he only hooked all this stuff up last night. But then my phone started going out. Like I'm looking at my phone while he's trying to get everything connected on the streaming computer, and then my phone's like, you don't have internet, switching to wireless, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't have internet. So that is when we realized that it was not the streaming computer. It was all the things. Oh, and let me do the tail before I forget yet again. I am glad that I did write that in the kit because it's so easy to forget that is also fur. And you need a decent amount of this wash too. I'm almost out. So, because it's such a large surface area, even though it's like a regular gaming size miniature or pretty close to, almost all of it is this fur color, or a lot of it is this fur color. So I know people like to be stingy with paint sometimes, but when you're working with big areas, I think it's easier if you're not too stingy with the paint. Well, okay, in general, I don't believe in being stingy with the paint. To be fair. And because the hooves were already painted black, it doesn't matter if this wash gets on them. That's why I had people start with that, because anything we do to the hooves will be later. And that way you can make sure that you get all the little bits of fur that hang down over the hooves. I'm trying to blow up bubbles. This, I'm not seeing too many problems with this, but that is a problem that I will find sometimes especially if I'm trying to really fast base coat or wash a textured surface, is that it'll get little bubbles, and blowing on them or sometimes touching them with your brush is usually good to fix them. I sometimes do this, which is probably going to seem kind of weird. So the canned air, if you work at it, you can kind of control how much you're pulling the trigger down so that it's not very strong. And I do that to pop the bubbles on stuff. Wendy says, I'm usually at the office during the day, but I'm home for the next 2 weeks. I don't know if this is how my connection usually is during the day or if it's just a bad day. Yeah, you would think that because of people being at work during the day, your connection would be better during the day. But to be fair, the internet is a wild and mysterious thing. So that is going to take a minute to dry. So I will pause and show off something cool that Ron sent me that I think you guys will enjoy seeing. I mean, you've possibly already seen it a little bit, but oops, I'm going to do now. It's a good thing that there wasn't much of that wash left because I just dropped that thing on the ground. So I have the Dwarf Kings, the Crypt of the Dwarf King. I'm going to unbox for you. And I like how they even have names on the back. So if you are like me and you are not great at names, when I only was a dungeon master for a little while because I really am not. I don't think well on my feet. It's not a great role for me. But when I was, they started realizing that I was terrible at coming up with names. So they would ask me the name of like everyone, the stable boy, the person who brought the beer, whatever. So I printed out a list. And then if I'd forgotten my list that day, I would just say Bob. Everybody's name is Bob. Sorry, Bob. But, okay, let me see if there's an internal. Oh, that's right, because you get a little bonus grid that you can use in your game. I believe it detaches. I probably have to open the other side. So that's pretty cool if you need to just grab something quick to do a battle layout. There it is, and it all looks like stone and stuff. Or you could say this is the great chamber where the tomb is. Ah, that's cool. So it's got the it's got a top tray that's form-fitting so that they stick in there and they're not going to get bent and stuff. So the guy in the crypt is a ghost. I know, Medzik. All that I've done so far is I touched up a base coat on my Krampus. I'm doing the Paint Your Krampus kit. And then I did the black wash, which I'm waiting to dry. So I'm doing an unboxing of the Dwarf King's crypt. And this is the guy in the crypt. When he says Trevor is her go-to, I can't think of a name. So that's pretty. So he's already ghostly and ready to go, though I know, I actually haven't experimented with this much, so this might be something to do on stream sometime, is try different inks or paint mixes to get into the crevices and give it just a little more dimension while keeping it somewhat transparent. And then there's another transparent piece, which is, I think they called it the Everlasting Flame on the back of the box, which I'm not entirely sure if I understand why this is transparent. I guess it's a ghostly flame. Let's see. The ever-living flame. Oh, that's right. I think it was an accident. that I was putting in transparent. But it paints up fine. So you can paint it with opaque paints, or you can just paint like the bottom and add a little wash to that to make it a weird, creepy looking flame. This is something else that might be fun to paint on stream sometime. Once we settle on what kind of brushes are the best for dry brushing, I could paint up this statue as sort of a test of that. And this is, I mean, it's a good size compared to the figures. This king certainly thought he was majestic enough to deserve an impressive statue. And likewise, the archway is pretty cool. So we'll try to make it look like he's standing on there, since everything, I know it looks right upright to you, but it's sideways on my desk. So there's some nice runes carved in there, so if you're not into freehand and stuff, washing will take care of that. Nice textures down on the base as well. Oh, and there's a little secret rune in there. So you can make this like a transporter arch or something too. Teleporter. I mean, that happens in games too. So some of the characters are the adventuring party that have returned to scope out the tomb. So it's an adventuring party of dwarves, and they have some magnificent beards and stuff. I really enjoy those. Tom Mason sculpted pretty much everything in here, I think. So he is the Dwarf King, I guess, right now. Oh, this is one of the zombies. I think they called them something else. Let me check. Whites. Oh, they're tougher than zombies. They're whites. That's not good. All right. Let's see who else I've got. This is another adventuring party guy. He's very fierce and intense. This is another white. So it'd be interesting to kind of paint the contrast of their hair looking all like old and brittle and colorless compared to the living dwarves having, you know, exciting red and blonde beards and stuff. This is another one of the whites. Oh, he's clearly got creepy sunken in eyes. He actually kind of looks, he's got a bit of pathos too, because I think it's interesting when undead are sculpted like that, so that it's not just this, you know, ravening, unthinking foe. You're kind of reminded of the life they used to have, and it's a bit tragic as well. Yeah, I can still see some shiny on my guy, so I'm gonna finish unboxing these. Here's another one of the living adventurers. And he's got, every one of them has done their beard up a different way. That's fun. And there's one more living adventurer who went for the split beard look. He's got more chainmail than some of them. Well, more chainmail showing than some of them. I think they're all wearing chain shirts, but some of them have stuff over it. And then there are a few more terrain pieces. So that's pretty cool. And you could get creative with what you put on that book. There it is in scale with one of the dwarves. And this is the actual tomb. So that's from the top. That's from the sides. So it's that kind of tomb where they have a sculpture of the person who's entombed on the top, and then his desiccated body is within. Which, I don't know, for a ghost, maybe you have to lay it to rest or do something else. I don't know. Now, I guess the fun part will be trying to figure out which compartment everybody goes back into, so I will not subject you guys to that. I remember the terrain. I have a lot of board games like that too, where they're very nicely giving you trays for all of the miniatures, but then you have to figure out who goes where at the end of the game. So let's see where we are. He is just a little wet. I think that for the sake of expediency, maybe I should just hair dry him a little. But let me try my images one more time. Nope. I don't know. I wonder why it's doing that. It's been working fine up till today because I've been swapping out images the whole time. So I'm going to put up the Be Right Back screen so that people know why they're not hearing anything. Well, maybe I'll just turn off the sound and you guys can let them know why they're not hearing anything. I will put the Christmas colors back so you can look at those while I do stuff. So a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago, because time tends to just pass for me, and I'm not always super on the ball about how much time is passing. I was sharing that I had read something from Golden or Liquitex. I think it's Golden. Golden does a lot of experimentation and studies and stuff to figure stuff out. But they were, no, I think it was Liquitex. Anyway, they were recommending that you not use a hairdryer on acrylic paints, which I was actually somewhat surprised by because I have done it a lot, and I know that a lot of other people, canvas painters and miniature painters, have done it. And what they said is if the top coat dries too quickly and the underneath is still kind of wet, it can make cracks. It'll kind of look, it won't be actual cracks, it'll be, they call it crazing to distinguish from the material actually cracking, because acrylic paint's pretty flexible actually. But as we discovered in the stream where I was talking about that, most hair dryers are going to have a setting where you can just do air. So that's what I was doing just now. Or you can use your airbrush. If you have a dual action airbrush, you can shoot just air and not paint. So let me check my step, follow my own instructions. Which I like to do. I might have done that with this one. That might be why I had so many of these guys left over. I'm not sure. But I like to go through my own instructions and make sure it works like I said it does. I don't always have enough figures to do that, but I like to do it when I can. So the dry brushing is just, the first level of dry brushing is just reestablishing the base coat color, which I will put out fresh in case my wet palette has made it get, now I've lost my black paint. In case the wet palette has thinned it down. I often don't use a wet palette for doing dry brushing, but because of the camera, I wanted to do that. Did I seriously lose my black paint? Nah, there it is. I do that when painting not on stream too. Every great once in a while. I mean, my system is better now because I have all my paints out on the shelf by color. But I used to have this like weird arrangement where this rack was like browns and this rack was like pinks, purples, and oranges, and this other rack was blues or something. And every once in a while, I would put something away in the wrong place and just not be able to find it. Like I would often just have to order another one, and then of course I would find it after I ordered another one. But I would like look through everything, being like, all right, I know I have X paint. I painted with it recently. Why can't I find it? So I'm going to dry brush on this cloth. And I was trying to decide what to dry brush with because we've been doing all those tests. So I have, you know, a big version of the standard flat. I have the size 4 Reaper flat. And then I got these. I got one of these at the drugstore and one of these I ordered off Amazon. And they're that oval shape that seemed to work well in the test. So I was kind of curious about trying one of these. I don't know if they're a little big, but since nothing else is painted on this guy, it will probably be fine. So I think I'm going to try one of these. This is a slightly different version of that brush. This is a much stiffer bristle, and it's from the art store. So if I find that those others are not working, I'm going to switch to one of the standard flats or that art store one and see what happens. But, you know, it's dry brushing for pretty much any dry brush is going to work. So if you're giving it as a gift, this one has 2 sides. If you're giving it as a gift or you want to do this yourself and you don't have a ton of brushes, like don't worry about that. But I am going to put out a little more paint since I know that those softer brushes suck up a lot of paint. They go longer, so I don't think you actually end up using more paint with them. But just in case, I'm going to mix more. So this is just the same color I started with. That looks like black when I show it on screen, so I'm not going to bother to try showing it on screen again. We will reserve that for more interesting parts. Oh no. I'm going to start with this one. So I definitely always kind of tamp the top of a brush, even a flat brush, because a lot of paint will gather there. But you can see that these soft brushes, they unload pretty quickly. And then I like to use a soft hand. And in an ideal world, and I did that with these guys, think about where the light is coming from. So you can tell that I was imagining the light is coming from up here because I left a lot of it dark under there. And I did the same thing with the one I decided was too gray. So for this guy, I would probably make the light coming from up here because of his, you know, his face is turned in that direction and his tail is in that direction. So I like to try to aim that light in an interesting location. Or not, the location that works best with the sculpt, not, you know, that will bring out the interesting features of the sculpt. Yeah, I don't know if this is a little too big for this particular figure. I was buying it online, so I couldn't actually tell what size it was. I'll try the art store one. So it doesn't matter a lot in this stage, but it will matter more a little later. Yeah, I think I can be a bit more precise with this. I'm always, as a rule, trying to go perpendicular to the texture. Maybe I'll take the white cloth away. If you can see the sculpted texture on his tail, which will probably show up a little more in the next step. on screen. It's easy to see in real life. I think it's just how the camera gets weird about certain colors. So a lot of the areas that are hard to reach, that's fine. You don't need to reach them. They would be shadowed. So I'm not stressing out about those. This coat I'm applying fairly liberally because it's like really just bringing back the texture. It's the next steps that are going to be making things light from the direction of the light. All right, so he's going to roll away. Sorry, I have to stand him upright. I got to find a little something I can put on the bottom of those so that they become less rolly. But I do like to have a round shape for my hand when I'm holding it. I know some people can use like dice bricks and stuff like that as holders, but I find that too tough on my hand. So then it just becomes adding amounts of white because I'm keeping the fur fairly dull. Like it's not a true neutral gray. It's going to look more interesting than true neutral gray, but it essentially looks gray to your eye. It'd be interesting. I should have grabbed another thing and done used pure neutral gray so you could see kind of how it's different, and it's more interesting for natural creatures, rocks, stuff like that. I think to use not like rainy gray, misty gray, stormy gray. Those ones, those are like just white and black mixed together, so they're very neutral in tone. There are places for those to use those. There are times I like my neutral grays, but living creatures are not one of them. Or stone. The lighter mixes of this would work fine for stone too. He doesn't have a stone base though, he has a snow base. So we will be doing much lighter for the base. Is he like at all in focus? I think it's having trouble with the dark color. So hopefully as I get a little more of this highlighting on him, the camera will start to behave more. This art store brush is pretty good. I like it actually. Now what did they call it? A round blender. Okay. They probably mean for people who are using oil paints or even acrylics, especially if you added a little retarder and you're working with thick acrylics, you could kind of use this to mush in between two areas to make blending. I do not think that this would work like for miniature wet blending or anything. But it works great for miniature dry brush. And I like to go over some areas again to build up the lightness if necessary. It's hard to explain that in the kits, especially when I have to be very brief. Like I think so this one was pretty brief, but I did take space to, explain dry brushing and how to paint the non-metallic metal on the barrel hoops. I think that's what they're called. But the little cobalt one that Ron showed recently, not this week, but I think last week on Reaper Live, that needed to be like super brief. So it has step-by-step pictures and it has all the color recipes and stuff. But it doesn't spell out things in a ton of detail. But I guess this makes it better for people who are maybe not so patient with my wordiness. Which I guess is probably not you guys, or you wouldn't keep coming to the show if you weren't patient with my wordiness. Because my goodness, I just yammer at you for a couple hours. Alright, my next step is to then just have more white. I'll just add a little more white to my previous one. If you have enough paint left over, that should give the right color. Now, if I were painting this on my own, even for tabletop or whatever, I would go lighter than this in very small areas. And that will be one of the things that if I take this guy and like, try to upgrade him a little, that will be one of the things that I do. But I know that people, especially when you're just starting out or you're trying to get something quick done, they don't want to do like 4 million steps. And some people, particularly beginners, but all of us, I mean, all of us have problems with contrast, right? So I don't want to like scare people with like crazy contrast. I am trying to be pretty judicious about this one and really think about the direction of the light as I'm applying it. I'm even kind of holding him so that I can really only see the parts that would be getting hit by the light source that I've imagined, so that I'm not tempted to apply stuff in other areas. If you really want to like start trying to play around with light sources and stuff, you know, try to improve your representation of the light, which is a big thing you can do to improve your miniatures. Like even if you're doing dry brushing and washing, it's a big thing you can do to make your figures a step up from the next guys. You can take reference pictures, so you can get a light, and I could get a light and put it here in a fairly dark room and then take a picture, and I would have a reference of which parts would look more lit and which parts would look more shadowed. Because we are very tough on ourselves as miniature painters. We expect ourselves to be able to do all of this stuff by imagination, and that is not a realistic expectation. Even trained artists can't do everything by imagination. Remember exactly what color things are, or where leather looks worn, or where the light would be or not be. Like, we're trying to imagine all of that, which is pretty ridiculous of us, really, if you think about it. I am going to get a smaller brush and just put a little of the middle color on this side. I think I skimped a little too much on the fur texture over here. Just bring that out a little. All right, so that's like the biggest part of this guy. So it's almost done, right? We can hope so. I'll now start painting base coats on some areas simultaneously so we can get through a little quicker. So I don't know. I hope you guys are all doing well. I don't know. Are you fed up with Christmas, or are you getting into the spirit now because we're closer to actual Christmas? So Auburn Shadow is the color I picked for the leather straps. Which kind of already have lining since we did a black wash over the fur. So that's nice. Which is, I don't think I pretty much in stuff like this, I rely, or let people rely on the washes to create lining. But that will probably be another thing that I adjust if I try to give them an upgrade, because the lining from washes is often insufficient. To truly separate things. And it's taking me a long time to work on the blog post that I'm working on right now. I had to manipulate a lot of photos for examples and get some help from volunteers. But I'm almost done, I think. And that post is going to have some information about why lining is more realistic than you think. I do have a bit of that on my, painting for contests, common problems that we see in painting. That's like a 2-part thing. The first part is more like prep and presentation and stuff. But in the second part, I do have some examples of why lining is more realistic than you think it is, but I have some even better examples coming up. But in another recent post, which is where to shade faces, so I don't know if I talked about that one last week, but I got some pictures from a lot of the pictures I was using are actually, there's this guy named Noel Cruz. You can follow him on Facebook, I believe. And there have been like BuzzFeed articles about him and stuff. But he repaints celebrity dolls. So like if Barbie or whoever does a doll that's like, well, they did one with, what's her name? I'm forgetting. The girl who played Hermione Granger, but she was in the Beauty and the Beast. They did a doll of her. There's dolls of like the people from Gone with the Wind, stuff like that. They are sculpted very well. I mean, Bob and Julie could probably tell us that they are sculpted very precisely like the people, because the sculptors have a lot of information and stuff, and they're supposed to make it look as much like the real person as possible. But then they're factory painted, and factory paint jobs are pretty basic. So you often can't really tell how well. So this is going to seem weird, but the coal in the barrel, the base coat is this ultramarine blue, but then the wash is going to make it look a lot darker. So dolls that are modeled after real people, actors and characters and stuff that have been portrayed in film are sculpted very precisely. But it's not obvious from the factory paint because those, a Barbie doll, while larger than the face of a miniature, it suffers from some of the same problem that we have where the lights are not in scale to make it look fully three-dimensional. Let me just pause for a minute while I figure out what I'm doing. So there's my Palomino Gold, and I'm going to mix that with that brown that we were using earlier, and that's going to be the base coat for the wood. So the other two things were straight out of the bottle. Here's my palette. That was the strap color, and that was the color for the coal that's in his barrel. Then this, I believe, is 1-to-1. Yep. To make a lighter wood color. So you can use that. I think Shield Brown works for like an old wood type of look. But I wanted a lighter wood so that it contrasts more with his dark fur and stuff. Maybe that's a little more Palomino yellow. So yeah, the How to Shade Faces article, if you are having trouble figuring out, where do you make things darker or lighter? Well, it's mostly about darker by implication. You can figure out lighter, but I'll probably do another one that's highlighting some. On a face, it's got an example with the lighting trick that I just told you about, how you can make your own lighting reference photos. But it talks a lot about why contrast and lining, in addition to talking about the faces stuff, it talks about why contrast and higher contrast and use of lining are more realistic than people think they are. But the article I hope to get up soon is going to explain why you think things have less contrast than they actually do, among other problems that we have. Because a lot of how we focus a lot on this. How I mix the paint, how I use the brush, how I get the paint on the miniature. Like, am I doing wet blending? Am I doing dry brushing? How am I holding the brush? How am I moving the brush? We're like really obsessed with all of that kind of stuff. And honestly, everybody in every art form is. They think if they just get the right pencil or the right paint or the right brush, it'll stop being so hard and it'll look like the stuff that they like that other people have. Even, like, I knew that it doesn't work that way because I did miniatures before I started studying art, and I still did that. I still bought, like, a ton of different brushes and pencils and whatnot in the quest, the eternal quest for making stuff not suck. But a lot of why stuff sucks is about your eye and how you perceive things and how willing you are to do stuff like contrast or look at real life and see how much contrast or how colors shift or whatever. A lot of what we get wrong is that. Because a really good artist can use crayons and make something cool. It's maybe not going to be the coolest thing ever, but it's going to look good. So it's not just the tools. That's not, we focus on that way too much. So I want to do a series of articles, and they're not all going to come out, one after another. It's going to be over time, about ways that looking at stuff is harder than we think it is. So because the other problem is that we beat ourselves up about being bad at stuff, and we're blaming it on our hands, or that we're just stupid, or that other people must have natural talent, which I'm not even sure I really believe is a thing. I think you might kind of have an advantage here and there. But if anything, I think the advantage that people have is they don't have this disconnect between, what you see and what you do to as great a degree as most of us. But those of us who do have that disconnect can train our brains to work better. So if you're familiar with the book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, a lot of what she does in that book, and I need to reread that and learn more of that stuff again, relearn more of that stuff. But a lot of the exercises that she has you do in that are just ways of tricking your, what she's separating it into left brain, right brain. I kind of think of it as your analytical mind and your observational mind. But it's ways of tricking your left brain to just back off and stop interfering. And that's because your analytical mind, your left brain, the one that's normally in charge, telling you how to solve problems and all that stuff, it sucks at art and it screws you over. Bob and Julie confirmed that when they have done actor likenesses, they were given a lot of reference. Yeah, and there are some, even if you're just into miniatures, there are some figures. If you look at some of the GW Lord of the Rings miniatures, some of them are pretty good likenesses of the characters. But you can tell that even more if somebody's painted them and also looked at reference of what those people look like and tried to incorporate where their skin might have varied in color a little bit, or hold on, I'm just reading my own instructions here to see where I'm skin. There we go. That's what I want. So here's one reason I chose these colors is because you can make skin if you have earth tones. So I got my Palomino Gold and my Auburn Shadow. And yeah, that's what I thought. All right, so let's just first start with this and see what it looks like. Because if you get this kit or you have these colors, you can make your own skin if you want. If you're looking to, people always ask me how do you make a small set of paints that you can take with you, and one way would be to have these earth tones because they're very flexible. So initially it's not that doesn't look too skin-like. I mean, it's not way off, but it doesn't look too skin-like. But let me make sure I actually have the correct colors. Yes, I do. Because I have some alternate colors over here that I might want to play around with while we're waiting paint to dry. But now I'm going to add a drop of white. And you'll see the magic of it becoming a skin cone. Ba-bam. Julia asks, have they announced yet when the Reaple store will open? I don't think that they are close enough to have an exact date in mind. I think what they said on the last Reaper Live is they're putting up the, the sheetrock. And then inspectors have to come and make sure that enough nails were used for that to be sturdy. And then I think they can start getting down to stuff without having to wait for inspections for everything. They are hopeful to have it before ReaperCon, is my understanding. So that people will be able to check it out during ReaperCon. But with all the supply chain issues and staff issues and everything else that's happening in our world these days, I no longer plan for the future. I mean, I like pay my bills and stuff, but people are like, do you want to do something in March? And I'm like, you know what? I don't feel like I can really commit to that right now. Who knows what March is going to be like? So I may or may not, well, probably not, going to do a lot of conventions this year either. ReaperCon, if things aren't completely on fire, will likely be the only one. Am I in frame? Even a little. Who knows? And you can, with those two colors that I was mixing for the skin, the Palomino Gold, which is kind of like yellow ochre, and Auburn Shadow, which is kind of like burnt sienna or red iron oxide, are the common earth colors that they use in traditional paints. You can mix them in different ratios to get different kinds of skin colors. And you can also use something like burnt sienna or umbers or more of a brown. I might experiment with, if you have the Kickstarter colors, they have an oxide red and an oxide yellow that are going to probably do a very similar thing to this mix. But they also have an oxide brown that would give you some options for like darker skin colors or kind of different undertones of skin colors. Trying to make sure I get the sides. He has actually kind of a, not like rectangular, but there are sides of the tail, so it's easy to miss spots. And I will probably have to do 2 coats on that and the wood, but we'll see. I might skimp a little just so you guys aren't stuck here watching this forever, or we can, I'm hoping to try to get finished today. But paint drying is always where you kind of get messed up on that plan. Just a little bit of like white or something showing, so I'm just going to stick some of the fur color in there. And now he has his little hands. And I'll have to work around that for the handle, but such is life. That's always kind of the dilemma with choosing an order to paint in. The usual problem is that, you know, the face is going to be under the hair or the hood or whatever. In this case, it's under his antlers and his fur. But the hands are usually going to be on top of something. So if you want to paint all the skin at once, you're picking something that you have to work to paint around. So you either do it in the beginning and then you have to paint around the weapons or the tools or whatever thing the character's holding, or you do it later and then you're having to work around the hair or hat or what else the character has on their head, or you have to split it into 2 parts and do it twice. There's really no amazing magic pro painter secret tip that I know for that. I usually go with it first. I am increasingly just going ahead and painting the hands later. I don't feel like hands have to be exactly the same color as the face. Often I won't want them as highly contrasted, so it's not the end of the world if they don't look 100% the same color. It's funny that we kind of obsess about that in miniatures. I mean, I remember seeing posts over the years of people who was like, oh, I painted the legs on this thing first and now I can't remember the colors. They use, how am I going to match it? But, you know, put your hand next to your face. My hand's like a totally different color than my face. And I'm pretty sure if I put my hand next to my leg, it would also be a totally different color. So that's one of those things where I was talking about how the way you think things are can mess you up in art. I think I put some kind of color in his mouth. Oh, maybe I left that part out of the instructions. We're going to put some of that just straight brown or red auburn shadow in there. If Bob and Julie are still listening, I'm kind of curious. When you were painting to likeness, is there a way that you can kind of test if you think you got it right? Like, do you look at it in certain lighting conditions or have some, like, I mean, you probably don't actually measure it. I assume it's mostly by eye that you're trying to place the features and make the nose the right length and whatever else that you're doing. But I'm curious to know if you can share. It's probably just that you're so awesome that you're just able to do it. Is how you do it. But just in case there's some kind of test or something, I thought I would ask. So I wanted a lighter skin tone on him because the fur was darker. If I had done it the reverse way and it was like a light gray fur, a darker skin tone would help make the face stand out more. Yeah, this flesh color is going to need 2 coats, and probably the wood will as well. Bob and Julie say just move the lights around, and coins are the worst. Oh, I guess because, it's just a bas relief. You're not getting the whole rounded surface. I didn't realize you guys had done coins. That's pretty cool. I'm guessing like commemorative things that they put in video game boxes and stuff like that. Or are you secretly making U.S. currency and we just aren't aware? Or some other country's currency, I guess. I think I have some commemorative coins from a game that I was thinking about painting. Probably Civilization. There was one of the Civ 5, I think, came out. The special edition had like a bunch of extra stuff in it. Jewelry. Ah. Hi, Maldrake HT. Maldrake HT. I apologize if I'm butchering your name. Oh, the reflections on the metal. Yeah, that makes sense. So when you do coins, they're more like carved. You don't do them in like green stuff and then they cast them the same way as miniatures. Honestly, I'm thinking about it. I have no idea how they make coins in the... currency coins. I'm just going to check for a few places. The wash is going to fill some of this in, so I'm not going to go crazy. I will put a little more. Since this is something that's projecting out from the figure, it is more likely to get picked up and handled and banged against things and whatnot. So I try to give stuff like that a pretty sturdy coat of paint to help it resist chips and scratches. The primer on this guy, other than the very tips of his horns, which I had to touch up just before the stream, but the primer should be pretty good because it's been curing since last Christmas, so it should be good and sturdy. I guess I didn't do the horns yet, though. So I made them slightly yellower, where the wood, this is the wood, was just 1 drop of the Palomino Gold to 1 drop of the Shield Brown. The horns were 2 drops of the Palomino Gold. Because they were a little, this is a fairly desaturated palette, because these are earth tones, not high chroma colors. But I wanted to have the highest chroma I could have on the more interesting bits of him. So the skin's a little brighter and the horns are a little brighter, where the wood and the straps and stuff like that. So that doesn't seem right somehow. I put the red in instead of the brown. That's what I did. It's supposed to be lighter than that. I just finished telling you how it was lighter than that. Even with only 4 colors, apparently I can mess up mixing. So for those who have come late, Reaper did this last year, but they found a bunch of them in the warehouse, the Paint Your Own Krampus kit. So it's 4 colors, and I assumed that you had black and white. In this case, I'm using pure black and pure white, which is what I used when I made the original kit. And I'm just demonstrating the instructions from the kit. But they found some in the warehouse, so he has returned again this year, even though I don't think that was originally planned. Okay, so there's, I don't know if you can see, there's like a big linty hair that just got in my paint. So that's why I keep like a little pair of eyebrow tweezers around. Because I have cats, but even just, even if you don't have pets, I think our clothes fibers and rug fibers and stuff will kind of float around and get in to your stuff. I would normally paint the horns probably absolutely last because they're pointy and they're on the top of the head, and the chance of me not rubbing paint off is low. But for the purpose of today, I want to try and get all these base coats done at once, and then if they dry quickly enough, I'll go straight to the washes. If they don't, I will entertain you with something else while they dry. We'll talk about the colors. I'm going to play around with some alternate colors for fun. But you can see, even though it's not dramatic, it has more of the yellow in it, so that it stands out as a little more lively than the pieces of wood. In another context, this probably wouldn't be a terrible light wood color in a scenario where you had more saturation on other parts of the figure. I get all the base here. I don't think I did. All right, so that is going to have to dry a bit, but I am going to paint just a little more of the skin. I apologize. I turned my palette around the wrong direction, so I can't get to the paint. I'm hoping when I did Kickstarters for a couple of palettes recently, and I think they're, well, one of them's actually, I think, slightly bigger than this one, but I think the other one's a little smaller, so I'm hoping that it will help a little bit with my can't fit everything on the desk problem when I'm streaming. And I'm actually going to pause just, hey David, pause just for a second and figure out what I did with the wash for the coal, because I'm pretty sure it's different than the wash for the wood, so I want to do it fast so it dries. Maybe it is not. I feel like it was. Now I'm worried I did miss a step here. I'm probably just missing it because I'm just skimming this. So. Well, I'm just going to paint black over it now anyway, because I'm sure that's what it says if I could find it. And actually, I have a little black on my palette, and since I need so little, I'm just going to mix it casually if I find my mixing brush. Hey, Miniatures Den and 95 Raiders. Wow. Welcome to today. I'm working on painting this Krampus, because maybe some of us are a little fed up with Christmas, And we'd like to explore some of the less touchy-feely Christmas traditions. So I've just been doing, I finished up the fur, now I'm doing the base coat colors on most of the other areas, but I wanted to add the black wash on this little coal in his barrel before I add the wash on the wood, since I know that it's a different color. Hurricane says, bag up all the kids and beat them in a bloody sack with a bat. I love it. Yeah, Krampus is, makes me happy I wasn't a child in Germany, I guess, because they have some pretty intense folklore things happening. But he is a fun character. And if you're interested in doing this yourself, or you have a friend that you would like to kind of get into painting, one of the reasons I'm doing this is because I wrote this little kit for Reaper. It was for last year. So you get the Krampus, 4 paint colors. It assumes you have black and white. And then the instructions are actually fairly detailed for being such a small thing. But they found a bunch in the warehouse recently when they were cleaning up. So he has reappeared this Christmas because you can't get rid of Krampus that easily. And I thought it would be fun if I showed people how I did the kit on the stream. I had an opportunity to do that. I wasn't doing the stream this time last year, so I didn't get to play around with him then. So that's most of the areas base coated. I think, let me check the horns. It's not too bad, but I am going to touch it up just a little more. And then while things dry, I will explain why I chose these colors and how they're cool and useful for things other than painting Krampus. So if you don't already have these colors, that's another good reason to get this kit. Because if you're looking for, I know some people like to paint at work, or they travel and they want to be able to paint while they travel and have a pretty small kit of colors. And some of these earth tones are very useful colors to put in such a kit. Hurricane Hound says, I'm glad I never heard of Krampus as a child. I had way too vivid of an imagination. Yeah, I think I am also glad that I had not heard of him when I was a child. All right, so he's going to dry for a minute, and I'll zoom out just a little and show you a bit. Actually, why don't I put this up here? Show you a bit more about why I picked these colors. So I always like to test my colors when I'm doing a kit or something and see what kind of mixes you can get. So this was my, ignore the pinks and purples. That was me coming back later to do something else. And here I was trying to decide between the ultramarine blue, which is what I ended up going with, and then this is ultramarine shadow. And I ended up liking the ultramarine blue better. But so it doesn't come up on Krampus, but you can see it actually mixes some pretty nice greens, things you could use for vegetation and stuff. Different browns than what I've used on the Krampus as well. That color is also related to something else. And then I think this was just more and more of me doing that. But I brought a goofing around piece of paper because since the Krampus has come out, so I use Palomino Gold, but in the Reaper Kickstarter, and these colors will be releasing, the Kickstarter colors are going to be releasing, I think, 3 or 4 months. The first few months of the year. So this is oxide yellow, which is even closer to a true, and now it's gone right on my head. Ochre yellow? No. It'll come back to me. But if you have traditional paints, it's, is it ochre yellow? Maybe it is. But it's a super handy color. Because this is, I mean, bright yellows, there are colors you can only mix with a yellow like this, but there are colors that it's easier to mix with a yellow like this. And then where I used Auburn Shadow in the Learn to Paint Krampus kit, the Kickstarter colors have oxide red, so it's a little more intense of a red, but these two colors should also make really great skin tones, I would think. Then the Kickstarter also had oxide brown, which is a much richer brown than what I chose for the kit. And if you use this color instead of this, it would drastically change some of these mixes. These ones I suspect are going to be pretty similar. So for kicks, I'm going to try some of these mixes. So the skin I just mixed now for the Krampus guy, zoom in a little more, was 1 drop of the Auburn Shadow and 1 drop of the Palomino Gold and then 1 drop of white. But I'm going to mix them and take a look at what they look like before I put in the white. And then this is the Oxide Yellow with a big clump in it from the top of my bottle. And then this is the Oxide Red. And that came out rather precipitously. Let's see if that, yeah, that is actually, so this is a useful thing to see. You see how watery it is? And sometimes people will think that their paints are super watery. What's happened is that the paint has separated slightly, and that is the binder part of the paint. And I'm not sure if the yellow hasn't done it a little too. No, I think the yellow's fine. So I need to shake this one more, is what it is. And I probably have stuff stuck in the cap. So it's like that clear mix got stuck in the cap and it wasn't fully agitated. So if you see paint come out and it looks super watery, you probably need to shake it. You may even need to stir it if it's something that you haven't used in a long time. And this thing was just, it had paint stuck in the top, I'm pretty sure. I'm going to put just a little more of that yellow because when I took the, oh my gosh, how many dry things are there on that one? When I took that away, I think I took away too much paint. So let's mix each of these two together. This was the colors I used on the Krampus just now without the white. Added to make a skin tone. And then the similar colors from the Kickstarter. And it's a little richer. It's a little more red. Because the red oxide, or oxide red, is a little more of an intense color than the Auburn Shadow. The Auburn Shadow probably has some gray or black mixed in it. So then we'll mix in 1 drop of white into each of these. Oh, and I didn't do my thing that I usually do. I always tell you guys to do it. If you really want to learn more about a color, you have to thin it down a little and see what the undertone is. So now I think you can see even more clearly how I said this one is much more red. But we should get a good skin tone out of both of these. So this is a very rosy skin tone. And if I were like really mixing for skin tone, I would not be necessarily doing equal colors for each of them. And I would probably add a little more yellow to this one. So you can mix skin tones from like pure blue, pure red, and pure yellow. You're going to still need white probably. But it's going to take you a lot more time. If you start with earth tones, you get there quicker. So this actually makes a little more vivid of a skin tone, I think. Which, you know, sometimes you're going to want, sometimes you're not going to want. And of course you can put more white in for a lighter color again. And then I think if we use that, I mean, that almost looks like one of the Caucasian skin tones straight out of the bottle. So this one I probably would have to play around with a little more. These colors are intense enough that they don't necessarily, they will mix good skin tones, but not necessarily in the easy ratios that I was using. Yeah, that's a lot closer. So it just needed more white because they're more intense colors. Hurricane Hans wants some fries to dip in the pink fit sauce. And he also said, it's unfortunate it doesn't look like Schaffenhauer or whatever from Miniature Stand made it over. They were asking some questions about blending, and this would be really good for them. Well, hopefully they'll come over another time. I do talk about blending and mixing colors fairly regularly. But so that was one of the reasons that I chose these colors. And then I like, so this isn't real ultramarine blue. It's not the pigment that is typically used to make ultramarine blue. So far as I know, the only miniature paint that actually has PB29 is Chimera is coming out with a set. And then one of the Scale 75 tube paints isn't pure PB29, but it has some in it. But you can get, you know, mixing these three colors together, you can get some neat ones. But I'm going to try, so I'm going to stick with the ultramarine blue, but I'm going to try the oxide colors, since I just showed you a paper with the other mixes. I'm going to try the oxide colors from the Kickstarter, because I bet a bunch of you have those. And if you don't, you can buy them in a few months next year and see what kind of stuff we get. So let's see what greens we get. So they're not going to make, you know, bright primary green, because these aren't primary colors, but they're going to make great colors for grass and vegetation and stuff like that. And then this, where's my black? And this will work with pure yellow too, actually. But if you mix black with yellow, that is a good way to get khaki colors. And you need just a little smidge of black, as you can see. So you can definitely get some nice greens out of this set that are useful if you're painting natural things. I mean, if you're trying to paint like emeralds and stuff, these are not the colors you want, but, or rubies. Because, I mean, the purple you get is a useful color, but it's not what you think of as purple. Maybe we need just a smidge more blue. But it's still, I mean, it's a great shadow color for various things. You can start seeing the purple more if I add more water in. And what didn't I mix together? You get a darker brown by adding in the black. And this actually, there's your dark skin tone right there. Then that a little, you can go darker still even. And I'm going to try that same thing with the Auburn shadow that is in the Krampus kit. Mix a little black in with that. And I bet you'll also get a nice darker skin tone. So people kind of figure skin tones are the hardest things to mix, but once you know about earth tones, I do not think that they are the hardest things to mix. You don't get an amazing orange with this, I don't think. But it's good for like rust type colors, stuff like that. So again, it's not going to be a vivid color. If I don't know if any of you are familiar with the painter James Gurney. So he wrote a book that you'll hear a lot of people in miniature painting and a miniature painting recommend, Color and Light. But he also has a blog and a YouTube channel where he shares a lot of information. And he loves to paint with, he calls it the iron oxide triad, which is ultramarine blue, ochre yellow, and either oxide red or red ochre kind of things. There's numerous colors that would work for the red, and there's different yellows that work for it too. But I think we're ready for the washes now. And most of my areas are kind of separate, so hopefully we can do a bunch of these at once. I am using one of these little plastic, you should be able to get these for like $2 or less. I actually prefer a ceramic one, and I do have a couple of ceramic ones. They're just loud and heavy, and I didn't want to bring them over here right now. But they clean up a lot better. So I mostly just have these for taking to conventions, but they are also coming in useful for this show. All right, so at least some of the things are going to be another black wash, which with the pure black, for the people who weren't here before, and I think I have a video of this on my YouTube channel. Maybe I even have the little paper here. But so one of the tricky things about washes is, like, everybody wants a ratio of, okay, how many drops of water do I put into a drop of paint? And you can't have a ratio that is going to work for everything. So I took every black paint I had and I added 1 drop of water to it. Or no, I think I added 2 to 1. So I added 2 drops of water to 1 drop of paint. And you see how different each of the results is. Even though this one and this one, I think, were the same pigment color. So even a color as basic as black is not going to react uniformly. You need to look at other clues which I talk about in the YouTube video, for whether it's the correct wash consistency. So as annoying as that is for my engineers and computer programmers and everybody else that tend to be the people who ask that question, you're asking the wrong question. It's not that you can't be scientific about it, because you can do tests. I mean, that's the test that I usually do, is putting stuff on a piece of paper with text. You can also, like when I use this kind of palette, I can see that it's falling down, and you can see where the dried one did it, where it's falling down from the sides and showing more of the white underneath. So I've gotten pretty good at judging if it's the correct consistency from that. But I often still will do tests to see, if I think it's transparent enough. And there's an example, like that's definitely not transparent enough. You can't see any of the text through it. But this one I just did, you can see some of the text through it. So that's what a wash is supposed to be like. It's supposed to show some of the color underneath. So let's see what sections get that. The straps get that for sure. And these were just painted with the Auburn Shadow color. But I want them to look kind of leathery, so a black wash should work for that. And this also kind of gives you a little bit of lining around them. And for those who weren't here before, in a future show, I want to take this guy and upgrade him. And show, like, if I were trying to make this miniature better, what would I do? So that's partly why I'm painting him now, so that I can make him cooler later. All right, what other one use the black? If any. Nothing else uses the black. So I shall start mixing other washes now. I probably should have read this over before and I do recommend that. If you're following a paint kit, read the instructions first and then start painting. Even if you wrote that, apparently it turns out that you should read the instructions first before you start painting. All right, so this is, in this case, I do tell you the number of drops to use because it's a kit, and that's kind of part of the point. So this one is 1 drop of Auburn Shadow, 1 drop of black, and 7 drops of water. Because I tested the consistency for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'll need just a little more because I think those drops of water are smaller than my drops of paint were. And what did I put that on? That is for the wood. I admittedly did not look up what birch wood is supposed to look like because I believe that traditionally Krampus's bundle of sticks are birch. But if you only have 4 colors to work with, sometimes you just make something that's kind of close and call it a day. Then the barrel. So I want to bring out all the nice texture that is sculpted in here. And let me double check. I'm sure I know the answer to this. Yes, this is Jason Weeby. There's an updated Krampus, well, a more elaborate Krampus that I think is available now in Bones Black, I don't know for sure. But it's got even more of the kind of traditional accessories and whatnot that Krampus is usually depicted with. I'm trying not to get this on my coal very much, but I wouldn't say that I achieved 100% success. So I'm just going to take a damp brush and try and pick it up a little. Alright, now I need to figure out the wash for the skin. Yes, I am making a wash. I don't often use washes in my own painting. I mean, for highly textured surfaces, sometimes, yeah. I prefer to use layering or wet blending sometimes. But I like things to be accessible when I make a kit for people, and this guy has a lot of really nice textured areas. So I probably wouldn't, if I were painting this, on my own initiative because I felt like painting it or painting it for the Reaper gallery or something, I would probably do all of the skin with layering. I'm going to do all the washes, but I'm going to do some layering for the highlighting. But in the kit, it shows you how to do everything with dry brushing other than some real easy non-metallic metal. And people even, I saw people do the kit and then comment that that was much less horrible than they anticipated. So this wash is, I'm going to use that purple color. So I'm going to use 1 drop Auburn Shadow and 1 drop Ultramarine Blue plus 4 drops of water. So purples are really nice to shade skin with, especially those kind of, it wasn't like a glaring flower type purple. I'm going to check that because I think that water bottle is dispensing fairly small drops. Oh. So it's kind of got a violet undertone to it. I don't know how well that shows up on camera, so I'll get my little piece of paper back for a minute and just paint some out a little thinner. So it's a desaturated purple, which is a nice color for skin. Sorry, I got paint all over my finger and I don't want to get it on Krampus. Because that's not what he wants. He wants to look serious and scary, not like he's covered in random paint splotches. There's some good texture on his face as well. It's the tail where the wash might end up looking a little streaky in some places. Because it's very smooth skin area. And that is why I tend to prefer to use layering or wet blending on surfaces that are pretty smooth texture. I need to be better about not touching places because I normally work on one section at a time. And if you're working on a bunch of sections at a time, there's a lot more stuff to stick your fingers in. So I probably have bad habits of touching the model too much because I work one section at a time. I'm trying to get better about that. Just double checking I got all the spots while the paint is still wet because it's a lot easier to fix while the paint is still wet. And then I almost forgot his little hands. Alright, now I just need... Grey Mouser says, a lot of painters have been using purples for green skins and reds. Purple is an excellent color to shade red, and it can work pretty well on green too. It actually makes things look deeper. I haven't really done it on green skin. Oh, have I? I think I have. I played around with it one time. But I don't like using black a lot in shading, and purple just seems to work whether you're working with a warm color like red or a cool color like green or something that's greenish or reddish. For whatever reason, it manages to split the difference. So 1 drop Shield Brown and 2 drops of water for the horns. I will often shade like with darker colors of skin or darker colors of red or whatever, but then come in at the end and add a bunch of purple in the shadows of everything. Or other colors too, but it's really hard for me to paint a miniature, even if you don't see purple. It's really hard for me to paint a miniature without there being purple used somewhere on the figure. Doing it as a wash is harder. So if you're using odd colors, it will tend to work better if you're putting it only in the shadow areas. So the problem with a wash is that it covers everything. So it is tinting your base coat color. And you get some of that back when you start doing the dry brushing or layering or whatever. But there may still be this undertone of a weird color in a place where people see it. So if you look at like midtones and highlights, that's where you're going to tend to want to play the color straight. So like if I'm painting red, I want the midtone to be red, and I want the highlights to be something appropriate to red. So kind of orange or kind of pink or whatever. We talked more about red last week if you want to know more about painting red. I painted this guy. So you can watch, I'm pretty sure the video on demand is still on Twitch here. But eventually stuff goes up on the Reaper channel, even if you missed it on Twitch. So for washes, it's going to be trickier to use the off colors, the weird colors that you don't think of going with whatever the main color is. But if you're doing stuff like that, you can do what I said. You can use, I can use this brown wash, and then I can come in with really thin down purple, because purple actually works on yellow too, because it's the color complement. And I can just brush it into, places where it would just be shadows, like this side of the birch thing, maybe. And it'll still work, but I wouldn't use it as a wash. And that is something, I'll probably experiment with that when I get around to the fixing him up stage. So I'm going to wish that I had done this earlier. I'm going to try and just fill in this little bit here because it looks very glaring. And now I'm going to attempt to find parts that are dry that I can start to paint over. So the straps should be dry because that's the part I did first. So I'll go with that. And I'm going to switch this around now. So after a wash, you do generally need to reestablish the base coat color, even if you are in the family. So in this color, the base coat, in this case, the base coat mid-tone color was this auburn shadow, and then I'm going to add Palomino Gold to it for highlights. So in the kit, I say to dry brush this. This surface is actually going to look better and actually probably even be easier to paint with layering. So I'm just going to do it layering here because you're still getting the idea of how the kit works. But because it's easier to be precise at, on something that's this small with a nice pointed brush than with a fuzzy dry brush brush. So then mix in a drop of Palomino Gold. And you already know what that looks like mixed together because we were doing all those experiments with the skin. So this is basically the skin tone without adding the white. But leather kind of is skin, so that makes sense. Well, not just kind of, leather actually is skin. But I mean, this would be somewhat tanned or colored leather. I don't think most animals would make this color leather naturally. Ah, I see, I forgot a part from the previous mix. I could do that part. So I'm just trying to go in successively smaller areas with the highlights. And then the third one is just to add another drop of Palomino. And you can see that I'm also trying to avoid white in the highlights of things until I get pretty bright, or if I can't avoid it, because white will really dull stuff down. Where if you have yellow, or at least a little bit of yellow for skin and stuff like that, it's gonna keep a little more vibrancy and be more interesting to look at. So even if I were painting like human skin, I might use something like this, or even something with a little more yellow than that, or something a little orangey, depending on, you know, that would be for a very fair skin, but if I were doing a less fair skin, something a little orangey, peachy. I mean, peachy is a better word than orangey, because I would not put like straight up orange on human skin. But speaking of skin, I think his skin is ready to go, so I'm going to jump ahead to that. So again, I reestablished the base coat color, which was 1 drop of the yellow, 1 drop of the red, and 1 drop of white. And I will also be painting this on because, again, the area is small enough that it's honestly going to be easier to put the paint precisely where you want it instead of trying to deal with a fuzzy brush in a small area. I did, on the one that's in the kit, the picture that's on the kit, I did paint it, and this guy too even. I did paint it as dry brushing. I always try to do it exactly the way that I'm showing people how to do it. So this is what it looks like with dry brushing. And then we'll be able to compare and contrast with the other guy, with this guy. So I don't lick my brush, but what I was doing just there was forming the tip. You can also do it against the side of something. It's helpful to, when you're dipping your brush in your paint and you have like a pointed round and you want to keep it pointed, if you kind of, you pull it out to get off the excess paint and you turn it sideways while you're doing that, that helps form the tip as well. I think the tip on this brush is going, actually, because I have been finding that I have to do that a lot. I won't necessarily just keep the tip. Nice. But they do go eventually because we paint on much rougher surfaces than paper. But the nice thing is that it just becomes a utility brush. You can cut it down and use it to dry brush or scrub things, or just use it for doing base coats. I keep my old pointed rounds that aren't so great, and I use it for metallics, so then I'm not wearing out my nest brushes with metallics. I don't think metallics are like massively damaging to brushes. I hear people say that, but the only thing that's different about them is they have a little metal flake in them, which, yes, is a textured surface, but so is this fur, and I used the brush on the fur, so maybe I'm wrong. I was wrong about the hair dryers. I might be wrong about this. Maybe I could ask the Liquitex or Golden people sometime, because sometimes they answer questions. And they make, they call them effects paints. They make stuff with metal flake in it too, but their stuff tends not to be as fine as ours. We'll probably see the texture on it. Let's see. I think there are more questions than I thought there were. So Grey Mouser was also responding to the question of using purple as a wash, and said, I probably wouldn't do that with Reaper Purple. You're going to likely want to go over it with the base paint in any case, especially for a Goblin type green. Terran Wanderer says the skin and initial gray on the fur looks good together. Would be interesting to see where you take it from here. So this isn't a super colorful guy because I didn't think that fit with the crampusiness. But the horns are going to look more yellow when we finish them. And that helps, I think, bring more focus to the face. Now this is quite a transition. I might not have made my wash thin enough. But I can always kind of mix an intermediary thing if I need to, or just try and feather out that edge. And this, I mean, the tail is probably pretty easy to dry brush because it's away from everything else. So it wouldn't be an inaccessible area. But I just thought it'd be kind of fun to show using the other techniques on that, since I have the example one that is dry brushing through it. And for those, I can't remember at what point in the stream I was talking about it, but the reason I have that other guy is because when I make the kits, I like to do tests with the colors before I start painting the kit ones. And if possible, I like to test the kit instructions. Like go over it myself, following my own instructions to make sure that I didn't accidentally write down, 3 drops of something when I meant it should be 4 drops of something. Because between, sitting at the table writing it on a piece of paper and then going over to the computer and typing it up, it is entirely possible for me to make mistakes like that. Give a little fingernail on it too. So I'm mainly going over areas at this point. I'm using the same color, but I'm restating it in areas that are facing the light more to try and create a little more nuance in the shadow transitions. And this color is a good skin tone, but it is slightly transparent, so I am having to do 2 coats to fully restate the base coat colors. So I'm going to come back to the tail a bit because I can see, in this part where a lot of light would be, I could see some of the purple still showing. I'm imagining the light as it coming from this direction. I'm not being like crazy stringent about it in this case. That might be something that I would try to improve in the enhanced improved version of Krampus. But just as a guideline for, where, I tried to keep the dry brushing of the lighter colors more on this side of the body and stuff. Because improving light is a big thing you can do. Even if you do just want to dry brush, thinking about where your light is a really critical thing you can do to improve the appearance of your figures. So instead of just doing it by rote or letting the surface, this is a first surface, I could have dry brushed it in a completely even fashion, but you can see there's less light there and there's more light there because I was trying to envision where the light was coming from. Little. I mean, he's not going to be magnificent, but he should look pretty okay when I'm done. And if you do make a mistake, just rinse out your brush, get wet brush back, and you can usually brush it off. And then where do I have my... So when you get an old brush that you don't love anymore, you can cut it down and make it into some kind of an eraser. So I got that out quick enough. But let's say I dropped a splotch of... I'll even do it. I'll drop a splotch of skin color on the fur. It takes acrylic paint a little while to set. Even if I didn't notice that for about 5 minutes, I might be able to get it out. Because I have done that before, where I didn't notice that I got a big blob of something somewhere. You want to not be too rough with it. If you know, I only painted this fur earlier today, so the paint is not fully cured. One of the mistakes that we make is we thinking because it's dry and we can paint over it that that's as cured as the paint gets. But it's like a putty or a glue or something. It can be touch dry, workable dry, but not all the way dry. So you want to give stuff at least 24 hours. So if you're painting miniatures to play with, you want to try to paint them 24 hours. If you can, 2 days before you're going to handle them a lot in gaming. Add 1 drop of Palomino Gold and 1 drop of white. Grey Mouser did GW Orcs with green from a starter kit, but the shields were corn red with Druchii violet wash, and I thought it went very well. And Hurricane Hans is painting some 40k orcs right now and might try that for accents. I bet you could take that same color and come into the shadows of the green orc skin and give it more depth too. Nope, I just put the wrong color out. Like you do. I'm just going to wipe it off my palette. And I really do this sometimes when I get stuff wrong. Just use a damp brush to get rid of that. And then take a little tissue and go over it. And now I can add the white that I was supposed to add. Yes. This is a highlight, so I'm keeping it to a smaller area. I'd be trying to do the same thing if I were dry brushing. It would be a little tougher on the small areas like the face. But it would probably be still possible to do on the tail. So I'm doing it on the top of the mouth here, but I'm not doing it on the sides. I'm leaving that the original color. And on the tail, I'm doing it on the parts that are, facing upwards towards the light. But I'm not even going to do it on the sides, I don't think. I'll leave those with the base coat color, which I still have a little bit of, so I'm just going to do a few touch-ups. Just trying to fix that transition a little, which is probably something I should just not worry about right now. And I think I need a little more of that highlight for full opacity. And that's just, some paints are more opaque than others. It's just the way it is. It's about the pigments. It's not people ripping you off. 1 drop Palomino Gold and 1 drop white. So lighter and yellower again. So even with this skin, I did what I said. I added yellow and white to the highlights instead of just white to keep it from getting too gray and boring. Because when you add white or you add black, eventually everything will get gray. Or dull. Desaturated. Is really the correct term. Which is cool for some things, but not for his face that I want to be kind of a focal point of the figure. So I'm just adding these highlights more sparingly, which is one reason I like using the pointed round instead of trying to do it with dry brushing, because I have a lot more control over where I'm putting the paint. Even though these are, you know, rough layers and I'm not going for perfect smooth blending, getting them in the right place is going to help the miniature look better, even if it doesn't look butter smooth. Oops. I keep brushing my brush against something. I'm trying to keep these in a smaller area again. Where the most light would be hitting. Actually, I think there's more light up there. So that highlight got a little wide, but that is life. If you get there fast enough to brush it off with your finger method is also a totally valid way to get rid of paint that isn't exactly what you want. I try to wash my hands before I paint, so I have a minimum of finger oils that I'm adding to the figure. But that's another reason to keep things on a holder and try not to touch them. Because if I were, you know, holding him all over the place while I'm trying to paint this part and I'm adding finger oils to this part, the paint isn't going to stick as well when I get to that part. So that is the skin done. Let's do the wood, which I will do dry brushing on. So 1 drop Palomino Gold and 1 drop Shield Brown. So this seems like a really boring brown. I mean, it was back in the day when Reaper had pro paints. So there were about 60 paints or something, I think. This was one of the last ones. I would go to my game store and buy a few paints every week or two. And that was like one of the last ones I bought because it just looks so boring. But that's kind of its strength, is if you have a lot of color going on your miniature, but you have like some old wood to paint or dirt or something else, and you just don't want to like add more colors because there's just so much going on. Shield Brown is a great color to use. And there's a lighter version of it that I think is Driftwood Brown, that is if you want like old wood that's more faded, that's a great color. And then Wood Stain Brown is a shadow color that goes with those. So I said I would dry brush these. What brush am I going to use? I'm going to use the big brush for as much as I can. So for those who came in the middle, this is actually a brush from the art store. They call it a blender. Presumably it's to blend acrylic or oil paints on a canvas. It's kind of got a dome shape, and it's not like a super stiff bristle, but it's a somewhat stiff bristle. So it's got a little bit of aim, but it also, you know, is soft enough to pick up the textures in a nice way. Traditional flats would also work fine for this. In some previous shows, I've been experimenting with using different kinds of brushes for dry brushing, makeup brushes and stuff. But I thought it'd be fun to play around with this one, which you could probably also do stippling with, would be my guess. And again, so I'm pulling down from here because the light is hitting here. So I want the most paint to come off where the most light is going to be hitting. And then I pull the brush down towards where I want it to be more shadowed. So I'm going to start here, get some of the paint off the brush, and then start pulling it down a bit to the areas that should look more shadowed. because this is where the light is coming from. If you know, I've moved him because I always try to keep my brush hand in the same orientation, which is another reason to use the holders, because you start building up your brush skills more if you're just making the same or similar strokes. I'm going to do just a little underneath because this has so much texture, and this is the base coat color we're going to be adding highlights. So I just want to add a little bit to bring out the texture in the shadowed area. But very restrained. I can probably use this on the main body of the barrel, but I will likely have to go to a smaller flat to get down on the sides. But again, if you think of a cylinder, I don't know if I have anything. I have too many lights, so it's not going to work as an example. Let me see if I turn up this light, if it helps. So if you have a cylinder, you can see that it's getting a little darker. The wood's very light right here. There's like a highlight right there. And then this is kind of the mid-tone, and then it's getting darker as it slopes to the sides. So I actually want my barrel, which is pretty much exactly this shape, to be darker as it moves towards his back. So have a lot of light. I mean, in this case, I said the light was coming from here, so I'd probably really want that to be the lightest spot. But on both sides, it's going to be sloping down to shadow. Although, as with the birch staves, I'm going to put a little bit in the shadow area just to make sure that it has dimension and texture. And then I'm going to come back in with, where's my very beat up little flat, and just catch a little bit of this side of the light. And then of course the top, and I wanted to switch to a smaller brush for that because then I'm getting near the fur and I'm getting near the coal. So I definitely don't want to be waving around a big crazy brush there. Should be a little lighter in there, but I'm going to choose not to worry about that at this time. That's the kind of thing that I would fix if I came back and improved him. Alright, so now I need to... I rinsed out my other brush. If I were working quickly enough, I might not, but acrylic paint can really stick in a brush. And I actually find, so after I finish this show, and people who watch regularly, they're going to know this, after I finish this show, the brushes that I'm going to be concentrating on washing are these dry brushes, not my fancy sable brushes, because I was able to control only getting paint up to about here on the sable brush, and I was using it in a gentle, controlled manner, where I've been getting plenty of paint in this and then wiping it on a paper towel. There is paint all up in this, even like, you know, I'm pinching it so it's dry so that I can start the next dry brush layer, but you can see that paint's still coming off, even though I shook it in the water and I rubbed it around the paper towel and stuff. So dry brushes and thicker brushes, flats do this too, are the harder ones to keep clean in a lot of ways than the fancy brushes that people worry about. Which is not to say I never wash my fancy brushes, because I do, but I wash the other ones even more. Alright, so now I add more yellow for the next highlight. Because this mixture is already so desaturated that white would make it super boring looking. I just have a little towel that I'm doing the dry brushing off on the side because there's so little room under the camera. So I like these kinds of paper towels. So I have this kind of smooth paper towel that I use for something else, but it's not great for testing your dry brushes because it doesn't have much texture. But this one, you can see where when I'm leaving texture on the top with those little indentations don't have any paint in them, that's a good cue for how you know that your dry brush is loaded correctly. You can also, depending on, like this paint color is probably too light, But since you have little wrinkles on your skin, I've been known to double extra check on my skin wrinkles if my dry brush is loaded correctly. But the paper towel is usually a good guide. And where'd my little tiny brush go? Which I also need to dry off. And even though it's a little tiny brush, it's still going to have a bunch of paint in it because it's a flat and they're just evil that way. But I didn't get this highlight color on the bundle of sticks. And so the light's coming from here, so I'm going to start on the top, get a lot of the paint out of my brush. And I'm not going to go down as far as last time because this is a highlight color now. But I do want to pick out some of these ends. I mean, there's ambient light around too. He's not in a dark cave. He's in a bright, snowy environment. I haven't done any of the snow part yet because it would be silly to base coat that white at this point. Since there's a bit with the hooves. And then I believe I add one more drop of Palomino Gold again. Nope, just straight up Palomino Gold. I'll try and get some of my previous mix out of the brushes, but I'm not going to bother to clean them. Hey, Reaper John. Thanks for joining us. You're on a 28-month streak, huh? That's probably from when Reaper Stream started, would be my guess. So this yellow is a little brighter, so I can kind of check on my skin if I want. I'm not saying you should paint on yourself. I just sometimes do that as a last resort check. So you can see how there's a bit of a sense of light on it now. There might be too much. Maybe I need to go back and add a little bit more color over there, but I wanted to try to give you an example of building up the idea of light with dry brush. And the same thing with his birch staves, which are also now done. So that leaves, I think, his horns. But I'm going to do a base coats before I do that so that the base coats can dry, and we'll see if we can finish up on time. In fact, I'm over time, and I would normally, on a normal day, I would probably just stay and finish him up, but I put a grocery order in that I have to go pick up. So I'm going to have to stop him here. If you want, I'll try and continue with him next week. I do have something planned for next week, but I probably could do both, finish him up. Hi, Sentimental Minis and Raiders. So I'll probably be able to finish him next week and do the other thing. But you can also try to decide. You can also comment if you'd prefer I just do the other thing, which is kind of holiday related too, but a different holiday, since it will be after Christmas next time. So that's where I am on the Krampus so far. And this is what, if you finish the kit, this is what he would look like. I'm just going to put him down since he won't roll away. So I'm pretty close. It's mostly just finishing up the horns and then doing detail stuff like look at the back of him, the hoops on the barrel, and then the snow and stuff. And then obviously the little handle there too. Julia Trent says, please finish him next week and have a wonderful Christmas. Thank you, Julia. And I hope you all enjoy your holidays as well. And I will finish him next week. Maybe I'll just do base coat colors on the other stuff so you don't have to wait for me to do that. Because what I was going to start to do now was base coat the hoops, and then the white, which will take multiple coats because I got black on there. Um, so I can hopefully do that off screen and then still get to do both the things tomorrow. So thank you for coming. Sentimental Minis also wishes everyone a great holiday. And I'll see you next week, and you can tell me what you ate and about your presents and what you did, and if you went out to the movies. I know a lot of people do that on the holidays and stuff. But thank you for coming, and I'll see you next week. We're doing a raid, so I'm going to go to my thanks for watching.